Good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for joining our least OPC Router Training webinar about how to connect to cloud systems using OPC Router. Especially, we are speaking about the MQTT and REST plugin and how to use these with OPC Router. And thankfully, my colleague Andrea will do the training. So she will do the hard work while I just will give you a very short introduction, very quick introduction, so that we have more than 50 minutes time for a live training session. Before we start, once again, thank you very much for your registration and participation and your interest into that webinar. I hope it will add some value for you and your work with the software or testing the software. So as said, this session will be recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, please, you have still the opportunity to leave the session now. The recording gives us the opportunity, if you, for example, would like to review some content of that training session today, you just can send us an email to sales@inray.de, and we will be able to send you a download link for the webinar so that you can review the webinar or maybe also share it with colleagues who were not able to attend the session today. I would also kindly ask you to please mute your microphones to avoid background noises, and also to turn off your camera to make sure that we have enough performance for the webinar today. So if you should have any questions after the webinar, so you can always send us an email directly at to sales@inray.de, or you can have a look at our OPC Router website, which you find under opc-router.com, and there's a special section which lists our international distributors by country. So if you're not located in Germany, you can go on that website and have a look who's your local partner in your local language, in your local time zone, who can support you with all your questions around OPC Router. If it's technical questions or commercial questions, please don't hesitate to contact those partners or contact us directly. So this as a very, very short introduction. There's I have also, I think, about 3 slides speaking about what OPC Router is, and this is all only meant for those of you who might not have heard about OPC Router before, but joined that webinar to understand what OPC Router is. So this will today be a training and not a marketing or sales session, but I will take maybe 2 to 3 minutes speaking about what OPC Router is and what it does, just as a short introduction. And after that, we will directly jump into the training session. So OPC Router, what it is and what it does. The name might be a bit misleading because OPC Router might lead you to thinking that it can only communicate via OPC, or that it's a hardware solution, a hardware router gateway, something like this. So both of this is not the case. So OPC Router is a software-based communication platform that can communicate with almost any kind of OT or IT system. It doesn't necessarily need OPC for communication, but of course we still have a lot of customers using OPC as data sources or also data targets coming from the automation area. But OPC Router is offering more than 40 available plugins and connectivity solutions that enable you to connect to almost any kind of production or automation system, but also top floor systems like, for example, ERP solutions or databases or cloud systems. And that's also what that session, the training session today is about, focusing on cloud connectivity. So what is the special value of OPC Router? Yes, of course, it can communicate with almost any data source, and you can have some automated data transfers. You can implement logics and processes into your data transfers. You can aggregate data before you transfer the data, and so on. So some pretty nice features, but I think what makes OPC Router unique, if you compare it to other kinds of communication platforms, are mainly 2 points. The first point is really the ease of use. So every solution you find today, they all speak about that their solution is very, very easy to use. But I think that the operational simplicity of OPC Router is really a powerful and unique strength of the product, because you will be able to connect different kind of systems just via drag and drop through a graphical user interface. So you really don't need to be an IT or automation expert to understand what you're doing. You just can click on your data source and drag and drop it into your development environment, and you do the same with your data target. You drag and drop it into your development environment, and then you just double click, choose your tags, and connect them via arrows. Just everything by mouse, without any scripting or complex stuff. So it's pretty easy to use, and you will see that in the training through Andrea in a few minutes. And the second pretty unique point is the availability of plugins. So usually if you have these kinds of middleware solutions, communication platforms, they can speak maybe 1 to 3 to 5 different kinds of protocols. But OPC Router is really offering more than 40 different kinds of connections. Some special native drivers and some standard drivers that help you to easily connect with every kind of data source and data target, which makes it an overall communication platform for different kinds of communication processes. So you only need one solution to connect to all your different kinds of systems. And just to give you an example, so these are not all available plugins, but it might give you an overview of how these different kinds of systems could be connected. So we have different kinds of customers who are also using OPC Router in a different way. Of course, there's a pretty simple use case where we have customers that would like to get some data out of their field systems, like, for example, a PLC, and store that data into a database. So if that field system, the PLC, is, for example, not speaking OPC, for example, it's speaking Profibus, Profinet, Modbus, or something like this, then we're using an OPC server in between. Preferably, this is a Kepware OPC server. And as soon as this data is in OPC format, or if the PLC also offers an OPC server, like, for example, Siemens S7 1500, then we can directly also connect to the PLC, get the data from there, and push it into a database. Pretty simple use case. And it doesn't matter if it's a SQL database or a NoSQL database like InfluxDB or MongoDB, or if we are speaking about SAP HANA. So we are supporting almost any kind of database with native drivers or standard drivers. But as said, pretty simple use case. But we also have more sophisticated projects of customers who really connect their whole production environment through OPC Router. So they get, for example, a production order data out of their ERP system. It can be SAP, it can be Microsoft Dynamics, Infor, or Oracle ERP, whatever. So getting data out of their ERP system, sending it down to the shop floor, the PLC starts the production. Maybe there's some RFID reader or writer involved somewhere. So OPC Router also connects with these systems. Maybe also the PLC is sending printing data to a printer, industrial printer. And if that system, for example, the printer should have an issue, OPC Router would also recognize that and would be able to automatically send out emails or Telegram messages to the maintenance teams to inform them that maybe the printer connection has failed, or that the printer is running out of ribbon or running out of labels, and so on. So really pretty different kinds of processes that you can create with OPC Router that run in parallel. and that in real time. So that should be enough to give you a very, very high level overview of what OPC Router does and what it is. And with that, I would hand over to my colleague Andrea, who will take you through the training webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Torsten. And I will share my screen. There is a question. I think this is something for you, Torsten, how to calculate the capacity for, oh, it's not for you for email plugin, but I think this is perhaps something we could discuss afterwards of this training. We have a discussion round in the end because our topic today will be cloud communication. So I first would start to share my screen. And you see the OPC router virtual machine on my PC here. And we see the, oh, sorry. Oh, no, it's right. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous today. I don't know why, but sometimes this happens. So I was a little bit confusing. Just to give a first overview of the topics today, you found them on the information for this webinar today. So today our first topic will be how to communicate to cloud systems, for example, with the Google Cloud, Google IoT Cloud, how to publish data there and how to subscribe. You know, the Google IoT Cloud has its own structure, and we will have a look at it, how to communicate with. Our second example will be the OpenWeather example that you also find on our website. And we will do this together. And afterwards, of course, you have the video session from today and the website on the OPC Router Plugin site for the rest example. And at last, we will show you how to connect to Teams, to send message to Microsoft Teams. Many people now use it. And we show you how to send messages, for example, from the production environment.
That sounds like a nice agenda. And I sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah.
I just forgot to as usual, I always forget it. And this time I forgot it again. So if you should have any questions during Andrea's presentation, please don't hesitate to enter your questions into the chat window, and we will try to answer that during the presentation. Thank you. Sorry, Andrea. Please go on.
It's okay. You always are allowed to interrupt me with this information. Okay, so first, of course, to be able to communicate with your target systems, you should go to the plugins part and configure your connection systems. So many of you already have seen how to connect to other OPC UA servers. So we use the OPC UA Client Plugin under shop floor and create a CAP server connection, for example. So I have my local CAP server here with a corresponding client certificate with the endpoint, with a user and the highest available security level. This means in my case that I use signature and encryption. And with the check connection, you can make sure that you can connect to your OPC server. Okay, if you want to communicate to an MQTT broker, you know the protocol splits the sender and the receiver, called publisher and subscriber, because it is some kind of publishing and subscription behavior. So you have a broker that you communicate to, and if you want to communicate to the Google IoT Cloud, it has an included broker, and we can of course click on the plus here to add a new one. I always double click to configure the existing one. You also could use the button here with the pencil. And I give it a name. Of course, I just called it Google IoT. And for some specific targets like Google IoT, like AWS, like the Azure IoT Cloud, we have some special prepared profiles. So, for example, it makes it easier to connect to Google IoT Cloud, so you don't have to go to the connection properties and set every everything on your own, you just go to the Google IoT tab. If you would have chosen the Azure IoT, then here you would find the Azure IoT tab. Of course, you can insert the corresponding information. You find this on your Google platform. You find the project ID. This is your base, of course. Then you have a registry ID and the region that you want to send it to. Sorry, I have some lag in my English. This is Europe West for me. And then you can create devices. My device is called presales_Andrea. And you can, or you must, in the case of Google IoT, authenticate with a certificate or make you as a trustful client device. So I have created a certificate called OPC Router_Andrea. You can create a new one here by create a new certificate. If you want to use a new one and delete the old one, you can directly delete it here, or you can view it. Of course, you also have the possibility under extra settings, certificates here. This is this tab. You can, just a moment, now it loads it. You can configure your client certificates, create new ones, or delete one, add new ones, and so on. So on the Google Cloud, just a moment, I have to find my window. This is my example here. I have already selected under the IoT Core devices, my device ID presales_Andrea, and you find some detailed information. You can use the configuration and state for the devices. And of course, you have the authentication possibility, and there you upload your certificate from the OPC router. To do that, you first, export your certificate from the OPC router. This you can do here under Google IoT view and details. You can say copy to file. Do not export the private key and use the base 64 encoded certificate variant. And then in the next, you save it to a file name and everything is fine. And then you can directly use the upload under Google IoT Cloud here at public key, and you can say upload, select the public key format RS256 x509, and you can browse for the file. You can insert an expiry date if you want to, but you don't need, and then click add, and you have inserted the corresponding certificate. So let's go back to the OPC router. So if you want to configure the communications, we go to the Connections tab.
Andrea?
Yes?
I've just seen in the chat that your presentation seems to be frozen so that people don't see what you're doing.
Okay. Okay. Then I will restart the presentation. I'm very sorry for that.
Okay. Yeah, now
because
I get the feedback from others that it still works. So maybe it's just for a few people that they might have some struggle with their internet connection.
Yeah, I have reloaded it, so perhaps it solves the problem for some people then.
Okay.
And I think we can step forward, perhaps for those it doesn't work. Perhaps you take the video. It's not nice, I know, but if it works for most, then perhaps it is a local problem. Sorry for that still. Okay, so now we want to configure a communication. So under Google IoT example, I prepared a connection publish. Of course, it is an empty design, just to have a structure for it. So first, of course, we want to create a trigger. We can use directly the data change trigger. So every time we the value of our temperature in our example it changes, we want to send this information to the Google IoT Cloud. So we can double click on the data change trigger. We select the prepared OPC server. We can select a trigger item. In my case, this is Machine 1 PLC, production data, current data, and then the current temperature. I use double click instead of using select and apply button. I think it's a little bit faster, some milliseconds. Then we can select when it changed at most every hour, for example, or at last every second if you want to. But in my case, I just would select trigger at a specific difference of 1.0 because it is the temperature. So it is a floating point number. And what I also want to select is the metadata output, because then we can use this trigger object directly as a source object. This is a little bit specific, but with the trigger we have all information according to the item that we want to save anywhere. So we directly use the information from this object here. So we have the value and the value time. And item name and the quality, whether the OPC server could get the value from the element or not. Then we use JSON, because if we want to send MQTT data or REST data, then we use some kind of data format. In my case, I would use JSON. You also could use XML or byte array or whatever. So for MQTT, you can use many different possibilities on data structures, but in my example, I would use a JSON because it is a very easy structure to understand. And we have the JSON read. If we have a JSON document, we can read and get the parameters, and we have a JSON write. So the write means we have some different parameters and want to write it to a JSON document. So I would use this one, double click to edit after I've inserted it. And you can insert the fields here directly if you want to. So for example, we have the value. And for example, 0.0. If we send no value, it is of type value, also could create arrays and object structures. But for this example, it would be enough. You also can insert the item name as example, for example, temperature. If we send nothing else, it's also a value in this case. And we can use the plus buttons here, F+, to insert them into the JSON document as parameter. And this is the expression one. And this is the name of the data field. I prefer to give the item name a name which is independent from the JSON expression. We will see it later in another example today, where it could be nice. In this example, it doesn't really matter, I think. We also can use the edit button here if you have a prepared one and want to insert it here because you got from the colleagues from the target system. You can also insert it here, or you can copy it here to use it later. And if you again click on edit, you have your field list here. Okay. So in my case, I would use the value and draw the arrow by clicking with the left mouse button on the value under the trigger or on the trigger, and leave it over the value element of the JSON write object. You see it's automatically sorted. This is this button here. This is automatically set. If you do not want to do it, you can unset it. And on the other hand, I have a constant value because this is my temperature. So I double click temperature, sorry. Okay, and send the constant value temperature to the item name. Then we want to send this JSON document to the MQTT broker or to the cloud. So I have an MQTT element on the data sources and destinations on the right side. So I use the MQTT transfer object, double click on it, select the prepared Google IoT broker connection. can select the quality of service. This is at least once is the default setting for this connection. I have configured it under the plugin. And we also could select some specific one for this connection here. The payload data type is string. If you send images, for example, or files, then you perhaps have a byte array instead. The payload encoding UTF-8 format would be good for me too. So I don't want to change anything here. And you get an, is it an exclamation mark? I hope so. You get the information that the Google IoT has a specific structure for its topics. So the specific topic for sending event information or data change information to the Google IoT Cloud is /devices. I have told you that we have created the device presales _ Andrea, or I have done it. So I would say /devices /presales _ Andrea, and then of course there comes /events. This is the subtopic to send the information for the data change. Then I can say OK, and I send the JSON document to the payload of the MQTT broker, or from the message to the MQTT broker. And now I'm ready with the configuration of this connection, and we can set it productive. Those of you who have already worked with me know that I prefer to use this button here instead of moving the mouse to the tab of the Go Productive tab. And I prefer to use this button here. If you have changed something on the plugins before, then you use the Select Services option here and say Go Productive. Then, of course, it takes a bit longer to reinitialize the OPC router instance. So you also could have used the button here to just set this connection productive if you just changed the connection itself and not the plugins. I know that that there will be some changes on that you have to always set the whole service productive if you activate the plugins. This will be some of the newings of newer versions later this year. So perhaps if you get the newsletter, then you can receive this information if we inserted this. So it takes a while to get ready for loading, because I have restarted OPC router service. I have already mentioned this. According to that, I have prepared the session, of course. I have already done some connections, so we have some older information on the values and so on. But now I think it should be ready, and as soon as the temperature changes, we can send the information to the JSON write transfer object and send it to the MQTT broker. Yeah, now it sends some information. There were already some data changes. So we see the value here. We see the temperature constant value, and here we see the corresponding JSON document that we send to the MQTT cloud. To the cloud via MQTT broker. Yeah, any questions on that sending data to the Google IoT cloud?
Yes, there's one question regarding the Google certificates. So the question is, in relation to Google certificate, is it possible to use third-party certificate providers?
Yes, you can include this by importing it under the extra settings certificates, client certificates configuration in OPC router. So you can select this then for the plugin, and you can upload it to the Google IoT Cloud then, so you can also use these.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
So, if we send data to the cloud, Google IoT IS8 is something specific. So if you want to subscribe, you do not publish the. We do not subscribe to the published values, because normally we send information for devices. So the only communication to the device itself would be sending configuration or send commands. So we could use an example for sending commands to the device in the OPC router. So I double click on subscribe and select the connections tab, of course. So we have our white paper again, and according to that, the cloud or the MQTT broker is the source system telling us now, so there's a new message that you can get. So we select the MQTT trigger. We double click on the MQTT trigger, select the same connection to the Google IoT. You see again this information according to the specific topic matchings. And the quality of service can be set. We can say wait for transfer. If this is enabled, then the OPC router doesn't acknowledge the message. This is according to quality of service value 1 or 2. That when the target system received the information, for example, if we send this information to the OPC server, then only after the OPC server received this information, either with error or successful, then the OPC router would inform and acknowledge the MQTT message. The payload data type also is string in this case, and the payload would be encoding would be Unicode also. And the specific topic in this case would be also devices / presales _ Andrea, because this is my specific device, and then of course commands. And then I can directly use a wildcard for receiving all messages below this topic, no matter whether they are in some subtopic. Then I would convert my JSON document that I get received from the MQTT trigger or from the broker. So I would have a JSON read. And I can use the same structure as before. Here it looks almost the same. It's just a little bit different sorted. So on the left side, we have the document. And when we click on edit, we can insert the prepared structure. You know, I have copied it before from the other transfer object, and I have my value and my item name. And I can also insert them as data fields to read them out. Okay, and so I can send, the payload to the JSON object. And then I can use the elements and write them to the OPC server, or perhaps I can use a simple variable in this case. For example, the value. And I can send the value here, and I can copy and use the same variable because it doesn't matter anything in my example. It's just to save it here. And I use 2 objects that we can see the values at the arrows, or if I would have used 1, then both arrows goes here and we cannot see anything. And this is no normal usage in OPC router. So now I can set it productive. Go to the State tab and wait for the connection to be initialized. I think it should already be ready. So I can use my device here on the Google Cloud, use the Send Command button. I want to use the text. I can insert, I have copied the value object. So I would again copy my JSON structure here. fill in some values. Perhaps 25 degrees is the temperature that it should have. And perhaps I have subfolder target values. And I send the command to the OPC router. And if it was successful, we get the information command sent to device. And if I go to the OPC router, we see the corresponding JSON document, and of course the corresponding values are written to the target system, in this case variables. There's a question whether it can support other than Google IoT. At the beginning I already showed it under the plugins part that you can connect to each available MQTT broker, either with the specific settings, or we have already a Google Cloud profile or a cloud profile like for Google IoT, for Amazon WS, and for Azure IoT. Any question on the subscription on devices on the Google IoT Cloud? Okay.
Not really. There's one question, but I'm not sure what it's related to. Maybe it's related to the email plugin. So one question is, it can support other than Google IoT, but maybe it's related to the MQTT plugin. And yes, it can. So any kind of cloud system that is using MQTT. So on our website, when you look at the MQTT plugin website, you will also find step-by-step instructions how to connect to Amazon Cloud, to Azure, to IBM, to Siemens MindSphere, and so on. So we've just chosen Google IoT for this example because it's easier to present. So I think that's it, Andrea. I think you can go on.
Yeah, great. So let's get forward step to the weather. We would request the weather at OpenWeather because it is an open platform. You can register without extra cost to just test with OPC router to get some current value. And you can register an own application key because this is something that you need to authenticate there. So perhaps I wouldn't start with the first object on the left in this example, but I would start with the REST object to make it a bit more easy to follow why I insert all the other values to the other objects. So with the REST object, I double click. Of course, I'm sorry, I missed to show you how I configured the REST plugin. So I step to my OpenWeather API REST connection. I've inserted it with a plus button, of course, and now I double click to edit it. And the host URL, this is the base URL that I use. You can also stop after .org and later use the URL endpoint with the data/2.5, but this is always the same. So I already used it in the host URL. And I don't use a certificate in this example, and I don't use authentication. I think this is also possible to configure on the OpenWeather API, but I do not use it in my example. So if I again double click within the connection, I can select the target system from the OpenWeather API that I have prepared. You see that it is inserted here. And then I can use the endpoint with the weather. It would be possible to use the parameters here with URL parameters and then say the name, for example, Q equals, and then the query means from which country and city I want to get the value, for example, London in the UK, but and you can use these rounded brackets to say this is a parameter for the city. This you also could do and insert some other query strings by using the and sign here. But in my simple example, I just would directly use the parameters option here. Of course, we select the format that we want to communicate. And this is the application JSON in my example. Of course, the method is get, not post, because we want to get the current weather and not set the current weather. Thought it is cloudy here, so I would prefer to set it sunny, but I think this would not be possible. So under parameters, of course, we have the Q parameter, and we can insert a value like Schenefeld in Germany. This is where I'm situated at the moment with our company here at my office. And the parameter is of type query string. Then I must insert the app ID parameter. This is the application, the API key that you can configure on the OpenWeather site. Okay, yes, I haven't opened it, but it is not very important. It is easy to find. Just register, and then under app key, when you're under your user settings, you directly find the app key and can register one. I have prepared it. I just have to copy it in here. And it's also some type of query string. And of course, we can test the weather and get the response and use it in a JSON document to structure it and get the parameters, for example, directly to the PLC. But I think in this example, we also perhaps could use the variables and send the corresponding document there, because it is easy to read, I think. So I have a variable called JSON document, and we want to get the status code and the status text. So if we miss something, then we directly get the information what happened on the server side. So the response body is the one that we want to receive. This is of type JSON document, then the status code and the status text. And we must fill the query parameters. So I would use constant values in my example. You could use variables, you could use table selections, you could use OPC values or whatever. So I used Schenefeld, Germany, and my app key. Please use your own. Of course, this app key is registered per user. So I think for your testing, you should change this. We also could use a trigger, for example, a bit trigger from the PLC. But I think in this example, to get a bit faster, also to also make the third example, I would set this connection productive and just manually trigger. So we can again check this. You see the yellow here because this node already existed before. I have prepared it and only the objects are new. And we can go to the status tab. See that it is now green again, and I can right click, say trigger connection, and we should get the value of the current temperature here in Schenefeld. And we see, okay, 200 status code, and okay, this sounds very good. We have sent Schenefeld, Germany, and the corresponding app key, and we get the value. I would just make some more space and see that it is overcast clouds, and we see the temperature. Perhaps we can go here, open this here and see the whole value. I would just copy it with Ctrl+C, and if I open my notepad, then I can see the full information. And you see the temperature is 294.08 Kelvin, and it feels like 293.83. Of course, you can also send some information that you, or some parameters that is also documented on the website. It has a very good documentation to say, I want to use the degree Celsius as unit for measuring. Yeah, this is also possible. You just insert some more parameters here to get the unit as metrics. according to the time, I would not add it now. If there's any question, just ask me now, or perhaps after in the discussion after the third example. So is there any question now? In the chat, there's currently none. And there's no hand raised, so I just would step forward with our MS Teams example. So how to send messages to Microsoft Teams. Of course, you need some preparation. I'm really sorry. I only have my German Teams, so you must live with that today. To see it. So under the Teams tab, you have your team. If you create a new one and you have the Office 365, then it will be there will be some name before the O365 underscore. You cannot throw away. So I called it pre-sales training, and I created a channel OPC Router Training, and under connectors you can create new one. For example, the incoming webhook. This is the interesting one for us. If it is not already there, then you can use insert. And after you have inserted, you can configure it. I'm sorry that it is in German, but I will explain. So first, you just give it a name. For example, OPC Router Training Sender. And you can select an image to upload. And then you go to create. And if you do that, you get an URI that you can copy. And this is the one that you have to copy into the OPC router then. You already see that we have tested it before. I think this doesn't matter. This is just the communication within the channel. So how do we prepare this? We first start with the source object. So we have our current temperature again. So current temperature from OPC. Of course, it's most up. Just drag and drop it here. Select the corresponding OPC server. Under tech browser, we again select Machine 1 PLC production data, current temperature. Okay, that would be enough for us. And we can directly use the value timestamp here if we want to. And we want to send it again to a JSON document. This is something that is predefined by Microsoft Teams because the communication with the channel over the incoming hook is via REST interface. So I would also prepare a JSON write box. I double click, and this is something that you should copy from the examples there. So I have also prepared an example. It looks a bit more complicated than before, but the most important is under sections. You have the possibility to insert some text, and under facts you can insert your data points. So for example, the temperature value with the corresponding name and the timestamp value with the corresponding timestamp name. And the fourth one is if you want to insert some action to click on a link, then you can insert it. Normally you would use, I just use the edit button. I think it is easier to read. Normally, if we have a look at the temperature, and my example is that the temperature limited has been exceeded, then you perhaps have a web page in your environment and in your company where you can see the current temperatures and perhaps some other machine information. And then you perhaps would have an URI that links to that web page. In my example, I just would link to the corresponding information site. So there you have a really long manual or information how to do this, what we do here in this example during this web session. Yeah, so I would use the text for the message as a value that I want to insert dynamically. Of course, in my example, it would be the same. And I would use the value for the temperature. To make sure that I do not change between the temperature value and the timestamp value, I directly would use the data field name here. It's unaffect 0, the value. So you have some structure. So I would say this is the temperature. And then I would insert the corresponding timestamp and would call it timestamp. So I do not miss the right field then. Okay. So now I have my current temperature value, send it to the temperature, and I have my value timestamp for the current temperature and send it to the timestamp, and I have some alert text. Of course, I can use a constant value here. Be careful, temperature exceeded the, the limit. Okay, send it to the alert text, and now we want to send the JSON to the Microsoft Teams. So I insert the REST object, which connects to the REST API for the Teams. And you see what I have inserted is the host. This is the outlook.office.com. And then you have some specific URL endpoint with the webhook, but you get the full endpoint, including the host, when you have created it, as I told you before. So I can copy it from my text editor here. I have done this before, so I can insert it. So I only have this ID, including the webhook. The method is post. The format will be JSON. And I just would send the body. So send the JSON body. Oops. It's the request body, of course. So you see, it's great. You cannot send your request to the response. I think this is something good because sometimes you do not see the tree between the woods, or vice versa. And of course, you can save the response if you want to a variable, for example. So you again have the JSON document, the status code and status text variables. So we get the information if everything works. And in this case, of course, it would be nice to directly use the corresponding trigger. So we have the OPC trigger. It's a threshold trigger. And we double click on the threshold trigger and use the corresponding OPC server. The item is the current temperature again, machine 1 PLC, production data, current temperature. And the threshold perhaps could be 10. Perhaps I use 11 because then we see it is different from the other information or message that we already have on the channel. If it is greater or equal, we want to set it and we want to reset it at a value of 9. So if the temperature goes below the value 9, then it would again trigger on the 11. So you only would get the information once after it exceeded. So now we can set this connection productive. I hope everything is fine. And then we can go to the status tab. And we see it already triggered once. We have the value 14. and we have the date, and we have the message, and then we have the corresponding JSON document, and we get the information, yes, everything is okay. And if we go back to the Teams channel, we can see the information here. Yes, you see there come new messages according to that I have set the limit to 11. The first value was 14. This is my first message. And then always if it goes below the 9, then it would react on the 11. So we always get the 11 in this example. Because we only trigger once if it exceeded. Yeah. Any question on that?
Yes, there's a question if Teams and OPC router need to be installed on the same server.
No, of course not, because the Teams servers either at Microsoft directly anywhere in their cloud systems, or your company has hosted it anywhere. So the Teams server is normally not at the same server like the OPC router.
And then there's a question about the port which is used to connect to Microsoft Teams.
Okay, that's a great question, but this I cannot directly answer. I think this is something we should send you afterwards. This is a good question. Yeah. But unfortunately, I cannot answer it directly.
Okay, and then we have another question. I have a general question, maybe from other sessions, which a colleague asked me to ask. Is it possible to have logical networks like or and between triggers or OPC items in channels?
I'm not sure what you mean with channel, but between the triggers here, of course, I have only one threshold trigger. We could insert another threshold trigger as an example, or a bit trigger. And here under this element, we have the chance to link these triggers by or link them by and, both at the same time. So you cannot structure or and end. You have to decide between one, but please be aware if you use and you have a bit trigger and you trigger once, if the threshold trigger does not trigger at the same time, and this is not there's no big chance that both trigger really at the same time, then it would never trigger. So if you have a bit trigger, as long as the bit is set you want to trigger, then the threshold trigger could be in addition. For example, only if there's a production order at the line that is really productive, then I want to get the information according to the threshold exceeding.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks from Fabrizio. So seems to be clear. Yeah. Any other questions? I think, yeah, we are exactly in time, so it's 1 minute to 10 in Germany. So are there any other questions before we close the session? If not, as I cannot see additional questions right now, I would just thank you for your participation and just point out that there are some other upcoming OPC router webinars this year. So today we were speaking about the connection to cloud systems. Next month we will speak about database connections. Also in September will be a special session about Siemens connectivity with OPC router, and I think also with Kepware. Then there will be another OPC router basic training end of October, and in November and December we will speak about how to script with OPC router and working with the email and telegram plugin. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for your very good questions. The ones we were not able to answer, we will answer them via email afterwards. If you would like to review the recording or forward that recording to one of your colleagues, please don't hesitate to send an email to sales@inray.de, just mentioning that you would like to have a copy of that webinar recording, and we will send you a download link. And with that, thank you very much again for your participation, for your time. We are wishing you a great day and hope to speak to you soon. And we will stop the recording now. So thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.